Hey, everybody. Welcome to Sama, Seattle Sacred Music and Art. I'm Derek Mazzoni, your host. Thanks for your time. Hope life is going well. And if it is not, I really hope that changes soon. It is springtime in Seattle and it's getting warm. The rain has passed. So we're hopeful. A little bit of a tan would never hurt. And thoughts of travel have come up. And that's going to be kind of a bit of a focus of my interview today. I have the composer and writer out of Leicester, England. Think about that name of that city because it's going to come up in a little bit. His name is Peter Kulshaw. He's known for his work in world music, obviously. He's traveled extensively and lived with various cultures, including Pygmies in Central Africa, Dervishes in Istanbul, and reported on music from the Amazon to Siberia. He has interviewed numerous musicians, including Fela Kuti, Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, Caetano Veloso, and Ibrahim Ferrer, as well as classical composers such as Steve Reich. Kulshaw was brought up in Leicester, England, and was exposed to Indian music at an early age due to the city's large South Asian population. He joined the West Indian Company as a young composer and recorded the cult classic album New Demons with legendary Bollywood diva Asha Bhosle. Kulshaw has also composed for dance companies and animated films and wrote and recorded an opera with Buena Vista Social Club's Juan de Marco Gonzalez. He was a founding director of the UK arts and culture website The Arts Desk and head of world music at Boiler Room TV. His book Clandestino in Search of Manu Chao, published in 2013, is a biography travelogue of his travels with the musician. It's been translated to 10 languages. He just released a new record. It's called Music from the Temple of Light under his new record label, Iskra Records, which translates as Spark in Russian, Ukrainian. The album features esoteric Christian and Sufi chants as well as Hindu mantras, creating a spiritual journey that incorporates different paths to the same goal. Recorded in Mumbai and Odessa, the album mixes Eastern and Western sounds, led by minimal tantric piano, meditative music for chaotic age. That's the one we're living in right now. Kulshaw's early influences from growing up in Leicester with its South Asian music scene also is reflected on the album. The album's production is a really interesting story, and we're going to hear from him. And right after a little bit of a video that he was very kind enough for us to send, focusing on his work in Salvador. Enjoy it, and then we're going to talk to Peter. Hi, Peter. How are you?
Hey, very good, thank you. Ottimo.
Thanks for being here. I appreciate your time. Tell me about
Well, thanks for inviting me.
tell me about your time in Salvador. It's a really interesting part of Brazil that most people obviously don't think about. You know, obviously you've got Rio, which is known all over the world, and then you've got Sao Paulo, which is the biggest city in South America, and also the cultural, not the cultural hub, but the technology hub. You know, I live in Seattle. We have a ton of technology workers. Most of them are from Sao Paulo, and I know there's a bit of a competition, obviously with soccer, but like a cultural competition between Sao Paulo and Rio. But tell me about your time in Salvador, because that to me is like the cultural capital.
Yeah, I spent some time in Sao Paulo performing my new album there, and then I've been to Salvador quite a few times. There's a friend of mine who runs this little festival, Encontro do Culturas do Mundo. It's a sort of small boutique world music festival. And so I've been there, I've helped out, I've advised on it. Anyways, every January in Bahia. And and I don't need much persuasion to go because it's the worst time for London, cold and snow.
Curate.
And I got drawn, and the culture, well, one thing was, I ended up writing about and did a documentary about Candomblé, the Iemanjá. This is like Iemanjá is the goddess of the ocean, and obviously some of your viewers will know in Cuba and Haiti and New Orleans there's different versions. It's sort of originally African culture sort of mixed somewhat with the Catholic culture, and it's very strong in Salvador. And then I ended up doing a little documentary there about Iemanjá, just filming. There's people putting flowers and perfume and presents into the ocean on Iemanjá's Day, which is February the 2nd. And yeah, I mean, what's fascinating, a lot of people there don't have much, sometimes from the interior, which is very poor, but they will come to the sea, an incredible sense of gratitude to the sea, which that was kind of slightly awe-inspiring, that level of gratitude, I would say. And yeah, so it's a big part of the culture there, and it's also known because it's the most African city in Brazil. It's known for, well, apart from anything else, they have the best drummers in Bahia. And also, it's been a real center of music. A lot of the best-known artists like Gilberto Gil or Caetano Veloso come from Bahia. So it's been that was kind of revolutionary music. João Gilberto was from Bahia. So it's had this tradition of very innovative music, which continues to this day. And they have, just a very, very powerful music, and I would say spiritual culture. It's your spiritual station. I mean, it's connected. The drums, all the drummers I was working with were connected to particular teques. They had particular, sort of temples where they go and they do their rituals, so it was the I don't know, people have an idea about Brazil. It's like the first images are football and maybe the Amazon and girls on beaches, but it's actually a very spiritual place, especially Bahia, I would say. And then I had all these connections with these priestesses who I met, the Mãe de Santos, the mothers of the saints. So yeah, so it's a very powerful music and spiritual center, I'd say. And then again, and I met this fantastic studio, and then I did some recording there. So that was a big treat. So I did a two follow-up albums in Salvador, which will be coming out in the next year or 18 months.
You've lead a charmed life, I must say. If I may say. I will say. I'm saying that. You lead a charmed life. Yeah. The new record is music from the Temple of Light. It seems like you've incorporated, I've been listening to it, you've been incorporating your like your experiences, and you decided to make a baby out of those experiences. That's a weird analogy. Yeah, you just like, this is who I am right now. This is where I am. This is what I'm presenting. This is where I'm going. And it's an interesting time to be able to do that. It's kind of inspiring because sometimes people they kind of slow down, or they're like, well, I did that, I'm not doing that anymore. But you actually, the muse seems to have called you and decided that no, you're not done.
Yeah.
You're gonna do this. Tell me what inspires you. Tell me a bit, like, it's not like you've been sitting around. You've done some serious work. We talked about your first interviews. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But you can
Yeah.
actually go into that mode and go into, like, oh, let me tell you about the good old days. Let me tell you about what I did. But you're not. What's the story there?
Well, I was thinking, I don't know. I think personally, I have to keep moving and be creative. Otherwise, I start getting depressed. I think that's part of it. But just what inspires me, I just think, I read this quote recently. It's like, all art aspires to the condition of music. In other words, music at its best is a way of expressing something you can't express any other
Mm-hmm.
way. And I think I had all these tunes and ideas floating around in my head for years. And then I just thought, well, when am I actually going to record this stuff? And I had a bit of a windfall. And then I just thought, well, now I'm going to do it. So if not now, when? And it seemed like, yeah, I need to do it. And that's the motivation. As to what inspires me, that's another question. I don't know if you want me to go into
Yeah,
that.
I do, because you've been around a little bit, and so your inspiration could come from many different places. And because of the fact that you have been around and you've been in these scenarios, I'm curious how that
Yeah.
leads up to inspiration. Because some people go places and interact with people, and it doesn't affect them at all. There's nothing about that really. What is it about it that kind of soaked in with you? Does that make sense?
Um, yeah, I do think. Well, funnily enough, the reason you have music is because it's not an intellectual thing. So, I could come up with theories for you, but it's really just. I mean, a lot of people, including athletes, talk about being in the zone. You're in the zone, and somehow it's coming through you, and that's a very exciting a moment. And that's also when you get the best stuff. Um, So it's really just creating a bit of space for that to happen, I guess, and then you kind of play around with it later and edit it and master it and mix it. So that's a slightly more intellectual thing, but I think, yeah, it's just certain sounds, certain chords, certain tunes. I mean, I'm feeling, as I said, for many years I've had little tunes in my head, and where they came from I couldn't tell you. In fact, when I was a child, I used to have all these tunes in my head. And maybe that came from, where did that come from? I don't know. Trailing Clouds of Glory, what Wordsworth said,
Yeah.
or, Previous Life. I've no idea where this stuff comes from. And I think it's interesting traveling around being lucky enough to meet all these composers and artists. A lot of them talk about they're getting out of the way in a way, or they're a sort of aerial. They're sort of downloading music that exists anyway. They're just the aerial of the radio, And it's like, I think that's one thing. And the second thing is, the most interesting people, they are themselves. In other words, a lot of musicians, if you're a punk band in Seattle, you're going to sound like a punk band. Or if you're certain sort of jazz, you're going to sound like Coltrane or whatever. But the most interesting people seem to be able to express themselves in the way we all have our own DNA. And if you can express that DNA musically, somehow that gives it a kind of energy. And often there's an audience for that because it just feels like there's something real. So in other words, by being more personal, you're having, you're reaching an audience in a deeper way. That's as far as I've got with that. It's a complicated subject.
No, it is, but it's interesting, because let me pivot on that for a second. Because who was your first interview?
Fela
Okay, so
Kuti.
that's an original artist. That's somebody who created something that allowed, transcended him, in his lifetime, and even more so after his passing. Afrobeat is
Yeah,
bigger than ever. It's literally, probably you can find an Afrobeat band in every city, if not every country.
yeah, yeah.
And so,
Well, also, one of the things with him was that he didn't go along with the system necessarily. Motown wanted to sign him, but he put all these hurdles in the way, and he kept, in a way, being awkward, and you know what I mean. He was his own man, and I think, yeah, extraordinary, flawed, brilliant genius, I
yeah.
guess.
And your second interview was with who?
Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan.
Okay, that's
So
an amazing story, but
it
that's
was
a
like,
completely different type of artist, a completely different um, connection to music and connection to um, almost like a spiritual path.
well, I think both of them had a spiritual path, but more obviously maybe with Nusrat. But of course, both of them would quite often do hour-long pieces, which wasn't exactly radio
No.
friendly. You know what I mean? But again, it was the experience of I saw Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan first. I think it was the second ever WOMAD, and he was supposed to play an hour in this tent. He played 7 hours, and nobody left the tent. You know what I mean? And then I was so knocked. Everyone there was just knocked out. What a voice! And again, I had to find out what was behind it. The same with Fela. It's like, that doesn't come from nowhere. So that got me into studying Sufism and Qawwali, and this was like music. It blew my mind, as they say. And then I followed him around like a puppy dog. In doing gigs in Southall, and eventually gave me an interview. And the same with Fela, I sort of pestered him. And then, so my first interview, I walked into a hotel in London. He's wearing a pair of red underpants, but he's got a huge spliff. He's got 5 wives, and his personal magician, Professor Hindu, who he talked to his dead mother every night through. And I'm this sort of student, sort of just left it. I'm like, wow,
That's amazing. That's a beautiful story. I could definitely see it. But you didn't stop. So obviously,
interestingly enough, one of the really dumb questions in a way. One of them was, so who's your favorite artist? This is a really naive question, which is like more sophisticated person wouldn't ask. And amazingly, he said Handel, which I was interested. Handel, the English-German composer. And you can hear some of that in the keyboards, actually. And he studied in Trinity College London, classical music. And so I got a lot of unexpected answers, and it sort of put things together, because my dad's favorite composer was Handel. I was brought up with that sort of music from my father's side anyway.
I had no idea. That's interesting. I had no idea that Motown wanted to sign him, and I had no idea that Handel was his composer. That connects things in a really interesting way, which leads me to your record, because your record feels like a connection to a lot of things. It's a you're putting a lot in there, and this is good because you've lived a life. But tell me the inspiration behind it, and even why the title, Music from the Temple of Light. What is it? What are you showing? What are you doing here?
Yeah.
And I hate to ask, because sometimes it's like, what the fuck are you going to call it? It's like, it needs a name.
Well, it was just a name that came to me, to be honest. And in a way, then it ended that whole. In fact, well, then what happened was I was thinking, well, it shouldn't be, because a lot of this New Age stuff is all about light, and I'm thinking about, actually, I want to integrate the shadow, so it shouldn't be. It should be the Temple of Life rather than light, but it just had a certain ring to it. And then I was thinking, well, I was going to do a film about the Temple of Light when I was in Ukraine, and it was Ukraine's a space between Europe and Russia, and it seemed like something really new was happening in Ukraine. And I was thinking, well, maybe if there was a sort of cult there, and then I came up with this whole film idea about the Temple of Light, which would be a sort of New Age group who were sort of pagan Sufis and everything, filmed in Ukraine. I was going to film it, and then of course the war started, so that hasn't happened. But yeah, it was just an evocative name. But then I've now got a whole script about this New Age cult from Odessa in Ukraine, and it's all about. Well, the short version is, it is this very, you did feel that in Odessa in Ukraine. There was a real idealistic energy that, you know, Europe's going backwards, Russia's a terrorist state, there's something new happening here. And I think maybe that was one reason why Putin decided to stamp on it. It was just becoming too attractive to Ukraine. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it was. I've been interviewing spending time with a lot of Ukrainian artists. There's a decent population here, and we're supporting as much as possible. There's a flag hanging in front of my house. But it is interesting.
Yeah.
But it leads me to, you got good timing. I mean, Fela, Nusrat, you're in Odessa before the war. You're in Salvador. What's your secret? What's your lucky charm that tells you that, hey, you need to be here now?
I think it's just some sort of radar. I think it's some sort of slightly I don't know. It's probably some sort of peculiar sort of neurodiversity, which they probably give me some letters after my name for. It's I mean, I could just say, well, I get bored easily. So when I feel a certain energy, I mean, you had Dak Daughters, you were talking about the Ukrainians. So I did the first article on them for The Guardian, and I did a film about them. You know what I mean? If there's something new and energetic, it's inspiring. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? I could say a negative way would be, say, slightly vampiric. It's like you're looking for blood. You're looking for the, you know what I mean? But I think it's more
like a nomad.
Just the places are inspiring, and they just, I mean, it's interesting with Salvador now because Bolsonaro's gone and Lula's come back. Bahia and Sao Paulo, it feels like a weight has gone, and it feels like the energy is now back there, and the stuff's going to be happening, and it's exciting. You know, it's like some black cloud has gone compared to 2 years ago. You know, when I went
Same here.
last.
Obviously, you know, the things could flip on a moment, and you know, you think that things are going to be a certain way, and they're not.
But also, I think if you're writing about music, you get there's a certain empathy, I think, or whatever. You just sort of get. You could probably got it. You could see someone on stage even before you've heard them. You've got an idea. There's the interesting energy there, right? And it's difficult to put in words. You know, I mean, you can look at, you know, 10 seconds of Hani Arani, who's on your show recently. You know, there's something going on there.
Yeah, her definitely.
So I think if you're involved in music, you get a certain, you know, talent or empathy or whatever it is to just pick up on stuff that's interesting. If you're serious about it, or if you're curious, or and it's not really an intellectual thing. It's something you or even somebody says something. Oh, by the way, you should check somebody out. And it's the way they say it or something like that. It's like, maybe, you know what I mean? So how you make connections is very, and of course the Sufis say there is no such thing as coincidence. In other words, and it felt like this with this album. You know, I needed the money turned up. Then from nowhere. Then I really needed some sort of retreat. So I went off to India and did an Ayurvedic 10 days detox. But then I met this guy in India who was saying, oh, by the way, you should check out the studio. So I checked out the studio, and they had some really great musicians, only one of whom I'd heard of, Paris Nath, the Mansouri player, and they were exactly the right people. So it seemed like the whole process of this album was very organic. It just sort of came very easily. And the people I work with, and the designer, and even the person doing the mastering, whatever, they just sort of turned up at the right time. So that's quite that to me shows you're probably on the right path. And that's what the Islamic mystics especially, they go on about, coincidences aren't coincidences. And they're little lights on the path towards God, in a way. And it's just a confirmation you're on the right path. So I think that's how often good things happen. And if it feels that you're on that path, then you're on a good path. So somebody will, if you meet somebody on a beach, you start talking about Yemejah, the goddess of the ocean, and something about them, then, you think, okay, that sounds interesting. Because you can feel something. It's not just the words. There's an energy exchange.
Let's talk a little bit about the money. Weird analogy, but the money
Yeah.
didn't come just out of nowhere. The money is an interesting story in and of itself, which leads me to the path, which leads me to even more. I didn't plan
Yeah.
to go in this conversation, but why not? Let's do it. You were talking about a pathway. The money came almost as a blessing. Talk about that if you can.
Well, I was thinking, I really should do more music. And I did music in the past. I put stuff out on Editions EG, which was this rather chic and rather enjoyable label set up by Brad Eno. And they put on, they had Penguin Cafe Orchestra and I don't know, loads of Michael Nyman and lots of interesting artists and a good art label. So I did that in the past, but then I didn't do it for a while because I was like doing more writing and stuff. And then the writing sort of went down a little bit because everything went online. You couldn't make a living at it anymore. And especially, I guess also with the lockdown, I started looking at all these stuff I'd be recording. And somebody said, oh, there's a label in Paris who do vinyl. And they really liked it. So I was thinking, okay, well, vinyl could be, people actually willing to pay you for vinyl. So you get 10 euros a copy sold. So if you sell 200 vinyls around the world, you get 2,000. Well, that's a good start. Anyway, the blessing aspect, one thing was I was born in Leicester, as you mentioned earlier. And 6 years ago it was that they nearly got relegated, and they were at the beginning of the season, they were 5,000 to 1 to win the league. But they'd signed a couple of brilliant players, N'Golo Kante and Riyad Mahrez, who, Riyad Mahrez is now Manchester City. And anyway, for no money, like £300,000, I think they got. And they spent $1 million on Jamie Vardy from non-league. This may be a bit esoteric for some of your
listeners. We watched Ted Lasso now.
They were complete outsiders. Nobody thought they could possibly, because it's like the big teams always win. It's Manchester United, it's Spurs, whatever. The big teams always win the league. So it was just unthinkable, but it just happened that we were starting to, I thought this team could win the whole thing. They're just brilliant this year. So by the time I put money on, it was like 200 to 1. So I put like whatever it was, 100 or 200 on it or something. So I got £20,000.
Dude,
when they won the whole thing. And it was it was also very, it was inspiring that because they were like, it just proved it's not everything is about money, in the sense that these other teams were worth 100 million and we were worth 5 million. You know what I mean? So the disparity in how expensive the teams were, but just fantastic team spirit and a couple of, brilliant players and some really people who really wanted to prove something, and a good manager, good team spirit against the odds, against the guys who got the huge amount of money. So it was all inspiring, and it meant when I went to Brazil, people heard my home city now, Leicester, even though Leicester, they're not sure how to pronounce it, but they know where I come from because of the football. And it's just, I think, interesting. When I've been in Indonesia, I had some trouble. You mentioned I lived with the pygmies. I was stopped, and there was a war zone, and the sort of guards had got machine guns, and they were obviously on crack or something. They were on drugs, and it was a really hairy situation. But I could talk to them about Manchester United and football. It's like taxi drivers in Jakarta follow the Premier League in England. So it's actually a good shortcut actually offered football. So that was part of the money. And the other one was that I knew Malcolm McLaren very well, who is a much misunderstood individual, actually. But anyway, he was very, he was an amazing catalyst and ideas man. a lot of his ideas never came to fruition, incidentally. But he died sadly youngish, and he left me his classic Mercedes in his will, which my I don't drive, but my girlfriend drove me around for a few years, and then anyway, they started putting it. They had all these regulations about old cars that became very expensive to drive in the center of town, and it was falling apart. And this guy offered to buy it, so I sold that. So that went into my creative pot. So then I thought, okay, I'm now going to spend a year or two concentrating on music stuff now. And I felt, because if I'd have somehow, Malcolm would have come back to haunt me if I'd have not spent the money on something
Hell
creative.
yeah.
I just spent it on something. If I'd spent it on something boring.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Your luck would be gone. It would be like...
But he was a brilliant man. I mean, he's very funny and quite sweet guy, funnily enough. He made a reputation for himself about being a crook and everything. But
well,
anyway, it's another
but
I recommend Paul Gorman's book on Malcolm, by the way, if anyone's interested. It gives a much wider, balanced picture of a rather brilliant guy.
I would love to, because he's an inspiration, and his work is, I love to see people that inspire me to push beyond the boundaries. As an immigrant, you kind of come here, and my family is baffled by what are you doing? You should be just doing one small thing and not others. And it's interesting because I want to pivot a little bit on your experience with the South Asian community in Leicester and how that influenced you, because obviously people know that it's the empire, and there was a lot of movement of populations from one country to another. But England became this hub. Obviously you've got Jamaicans, Trinidadians, but the South Asian community played a significant role in cuisine and in
national dish, chicken tikka masala.
Yeah, but it's
fish and chips and carrot, basically our national dish.
But I'm curious, how did that influence from Handel to how you approach music, to end up working with Asha Bhosle and others? Like, how did that come about, and what did that do for you?
Well, it was, I was surrounded. If you live in Leicester, you get to hear coming up. In fact, in the restaurants and stuff, you hear Bollywood, of course. And Asha Bhosle and Lata Mangeshkar, her sister, were coming at me all the time from an early age. I mean, they think they recorded more songs than anyone else in history or something. Amazing singers. And that high voice, it cuts through really bad sound systems as well. So I heard a lot of that. And then I heard Revolver, and I think that track, Tomorrow Never Knows. It was like, what the fuck?
That's a great one.
So that got me into Ravi Shankar, like a lot of people as a young, all that classical Indian stuff. And then when I came to London, they used to have these concerts at the Cambodian embassy, because when Cambodia was empty, and it's a very plush place. And it was just taken over by sort of students and squatters and stuff. And they used to do these concerts, and they had the Drupat. It's like the Dagar brothers. I don't know if you come across them.
No.
But they're really the oldest form of Indian classical music. And they basically put everyone in the audience under a kind of trance. I've never really experienced it before or since, really. They managed to get the whole audience. A bit with Qawwali, I've seen it. But and then it was like hardly moved any note for about an hour, and then once they got the audience under their power, they then start, and you can feel the music going up and down your chakras or whatever, your body. It's quite amazing, and so that was a big deal for me. And then there was Nusrat, who we already mentioned, and I ended up going to Qawwali Festival. And again, the whole technique is you get the audience, for a week, they light on the audience. So if certain parts of the audience are a bit cold, they will just put a lot of energy there. And there comes a point, it might be 1 or 2 hours in, where suddenly everyone's on board. then the whole thing
Yeah.
takes off.
I've
Then the
experienced that.
trance healing, and then you can, you get saints in the audience from 500 years ago, and everyone sees it. So it's very intense, a magical thing, and it is the sort of thing you're not going to see in a 1-hour gig at a festival. It's a 6-hour
Yeah.
thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which I think is a shame, because and that's one advantage of traveling and with doing music, because you can have this real experience the music, which people tend not to have if it's just on tour and they're doing a little 1.5 hours or something.
Yeah.
And some music travels better than others. Some Indian temple music probably works better in an Indian temple rather than on a festival stage or whatever.
Yeah.
And a lot of stuff. Anyway, sorry.
No. You go on.
Some stuff doesn't really travel, or some just can't travel. I mean, some of the choirs I saw in South Africa, 100 people, 200 people choirs. It's amazing. But people can't afford to tour them around. You know what I mean?
No, I completely.
So I love both the very serious spiritual stuff, and I also love some of the Bollywood stuff. And I also worked with R.D. Burman, who was a great global figure who
he was the composer.
in the 60s, he was doing Latin music, and he was very eclectic, and so he was doing world music in about 1967. Yeah. And Bollywood intensity steals all over the place. It's quite interesting. I've had a song stolen from me, which ended up in a Bollywood film, and I could have been annoyed, but in fact I was like vaguely flattered, actually. Yeah. But it's super eclectic, and that's very interesting as well. So I like the spirituality, and I like the sort of slightly old style Bollywood, like R.D. Burman or his father, S.D. Burman, for example. And very beautiful. And you see, and then it becomes the soundtrack to people's lives. So it's a huge thing. And in Senegal, I had Bollywood music. I had this very glamorous quartet of women singing Bollywood songs in Senegal. In Russia, they love Bollywood. In Indonesia, Singapore, it just was a huge thing. Incredible energy behind it. And I spent 6 months living in Bombay in 1990 and recorded stuff there, and some of which may actually didn't come out, but it may come out next year. I'm hoping.
I hope so too.
Anyway,
so let's future trip right now for a little bit, because you're the right person to talk to about this. I have been in this industry for 35 years, and we talked about Revolver, Beatles, Tomorrow Never Knows, the times you're walking through a restaurant and you're hearing Asha Bhosle and Corner Shop and all these other things that are starting to build it up, and obviously Brazilian music and Qawwali and all these things that are, for a long time, it was people like you and I that would go to the record shops or would get a chance to travel and bring back this music and have people listen to it. And there was, the term world music came about, and then there was interest in it. WOMAD, other festivals, suddenly WOMEX happened, where you got all these people coming together that are in this space, and it's been kind of moving along, but still in this kind of Western filter on it. The music industry, kind of kills itself every 10 years, and we're in the middle of that right now.
Right.
I'm super curious.
Right.
And I have my own ideas, but I want to kind of bounce them off with you a little bit. I'm super curious what music will become in light of Bollywood, Brazil, not even Brazil, but Salvador, Sao Paulo, Africa, Afrobeats, Nigeria, South Africa, Malawi, some of the more traditional pieces, some of the interesting stuff that come out of Kampala right now, and obviously China and the things that are coming from India. Because back in the day, you needed to find a shop. You needed to be adventurous and go and pull these records out. Now everything is available to anyone, anywhere. All you need is technology to access it. And it feels like the filters are going away. And this opportunity for musicians, music, cultures, ideas, this ritual of on February 2nd to go to the ocean and and put flowers in the ocean for the goddess of the ocean. All of those things feel like they're less esoteric and more like that's the way things are going to be. Like we're all going to be Brazil. We're all going to be in this really interesting layered cultural identity Creole perspective where these
Yeah.
other sounds, and I'll start with music. Obviously culture and money is a whole other story, but it feels like music is elevating right now, and it's having its opportunity for it to be on par with all the other music that is being more or less shoved down our throat.
Well, it's a big subject. I think one thing has changed. You can find, you mentioned Afrobeats, you know, places like Nigeria and, you know, Korea is obvious example.
Yeah.
Then, sorry, my phone is, it doesn't need to be filtered via New York or London or anything else. You know, it can go direct to the audience. So that's a change. I think it's probably a good thing. You know, it's like balancing out. It's like, you know, I think it's, I don't really know where to go with this. I think there's certainly people I think value experiential stuff. Like it's a really, you know, I did this concert in Sao Paulo. People said to me, you know, this took me on a sort of journey, and people were, you know, several people were in tears. I was very honored by that in a way, because it's like they've come to see something, and they went on a sort of journey, which you can't get off a little phone MP3. So I think that's strong.
No.
I think generally you know, most of pop music is very corporate, and it, you know, it seems like, I can remember before punk, everything was like overblown, and it was like very, you know, and it feels like, you know, if you hear the top 10 on Spotify, a lot of it is, you know, they've got the same drum machines, the same chords, auto-tune things. It's very corporate, I would say. So at what point that stamps on individual artists? Because I do wonder if somebody like Tom Waits or Leonard Cohen or Fela Kuti was coming through today, how they would actually, you know, would they find an audience? Because they're not going to go on one of these TV talent shows.
Well, no, but
anyway,
but your audience can be so different right now, and you know, I don't know. The economics can be a little difficult to say the least, but you can find an audience, and if you start touring, like I just had Hania Rani on, and she's, you know, a really wonderful esoteric Polish pianist. First time she played in Seattle, they had to move the gig to a much bigger space because
I heard that story.
Because it's like, wait a second, this is bigger, and she's coming back in December, and we're co-presenting that show because, you know, okay, this is important. People need to experience this. You were talking about that moment in Kowali where everybody kicks in. I had that experience. My wife and I, and we're literally, she's like, what the hell just happened? You know, it was just like that connection. And for me personally, if I'm not starting to tear up, and it doesn't matter the genre, if I'm not starting to tear up, then it's not affecting me. Then it's like, okay, whatever. And corporate doesn't do that, but it's like that connection. And in the past, it was just so limited. Now it's much broader, and is an opportunity for different cultures, different languages. We're not limited. Like, you know, obviously there are fucking assholes who are going to go like, nah, that's not going to work. You know, it's just, this doesn't sound like the hits that we have right now. Well, fuck you. But stuff like Hania Rani and others will work.
You could end up with some mishmash of everything, which doesn't really, you know, I think I've talked about, I had a long relationship with Indian music. It wasn't just that I sampled something or thought, oh, it'd be fun to have a sitar, you know, that would sound nice. And you could tell that stuff, you know, there was actually, there's a real connection between me and the musicians and me and the place and the culture. And I had one interesting experience when I was doing this documentary about Iemanjá in Brazil, about the flowers of the ocean, all that. And also the relation of the evangelicals to that as well, because they were, there's an antagonism there. But then I didn't want to get to a position of saying all evangelicals are bad. Anyway, I did this thing, and the people in London were saying, listen, you're a white middle class guy, don't be in this documentary at all. So I said, okay, I won't be. But then when I asked the people in Brazil, they said, of course, we want you to be there.
Yeah.
We want you to be, expressing on screen your appreciation for this culture, which we don't often get a sort of affirmation from somewhere else in the world. So they said you should be in the documentary. People in London said don't. But I went along with I had myself a bit in the documentary because they asked me to. And the practitioners said it was better. Yeah. So I just think also a lot of stuff about, it's like what works. And I think we can, there's a lot of sort of, I would say a certain guilt, identity politics, all this purity. There's a lot of guilt going around as well, which I don't think is useful, to be honest.
No.
But anyway, different subject.
No. But this is the subject that's going on right now, and this is kind of like why I alluded to, like, are we going to be Brazil? Obviously, there's racism in Brazil. Obviously, there's social structures and everything else. But it feels like we're in this, and I live in a very progressive city that has a policy of no good deed shall go unpunished, and there's a lot of finger pointing that's going on right now, and it's difficult. But it feels like the pendulum is in a particular way. I have a picture of my wife and I for my 27th birthday. I'm wearing a sombrero, and my daughters are like, "What are you doing?" And it's just like, I'm wearing a sombrero because I'm in a Mexican restaurant on my birthday, and it's fine. Okay, hey everybody, we're back. I'm here with Peter Kulshaw. This is going to be an interesting video because we recorded it twice. I'm trying to be cinematically correct. Same shirt. Peter's kind of close to, but obviously we're in two different time zones, two different countries. We had a technical glitch, but that got fixed. So now we're back with you to finish the story of Peter's new album, Temple of Light. And he's got vinyl in his hands right now. Peter, show the vinyl.
Where is the vinyl? What have I done with it? I'll find it. I put it away because.
Okay, put it up. Let's get back to it right now.
There it is.
He had vinyl.
There it is. It's like.
Put it right in front so people can see it. And look, there's the garden. There's Peter's garden, and there's the front of his desk. Music from the Temple of Light. Yay! So it does exist. It's a beautiful record. I've been playing it. In various settings, whether it's on my radio show or just in home. Obviously, I'm never play it during club sets, but it is a beautiful testament to a really interesting life. And as we were talking about Peter's work, obviously, he just told me that he put on a Sufi festival in around London. And when was that? Like the
97.
97.
Sufi musicians from all around the world, and from Morocco, West Africa, Indonesia, India. And so I was just sitting in my little this same flat actually, and they're just like, okay, do you want to fly to Jakarta? Do you want to go to to hang out with these Sufis and Sufi masters? It was quite surreal and obviously great privilege actually, and just hanging out with these people. So that was the days when there was money for this kind of thing. I don't know if there is anymore, but anyway.
Yeah, that's going to be tough. Unfortunately,
but it was a fantastic thing we did, and it was live. We did the main events near the mosque in Regent's Park, so we were sort of probably 60% Muslim audience, 40% non-Muslim, and the energy was great, and of course the musicians loved hanging out with the other musicians, and it was actually probably one of the best projects I've ever been involved in. Yeah, it was amazing.
Hopefully the funding for something like that can come back in again. But tell me a little bit, obviously we covered how you were able to fund this record. Thank you, Malcolm McLaren, and thank you, Leicester, the football club, for bringing
Leicester
in
are now about to be relegated. It's a disaster. Anyway.
Hey man, it's life, you're on top, and then it comes
down.
It
says in the Bible, seven lean years, seven rich years.
So the record was made, it's out right now. The
vinyl is coming in a couple of months.
The vinyl's coming in a few months,
just
but
got
you
the
have
advance copy, by the way.
It's available on Bandcamp.
Find it on Bandcamp.
And isn't Bandcamp wonderful? So let's talk about that for a second, because you're in an interesting position. It's not just you're just a musician just a musician. You're not a musician
Mm.
that's just focused on, here's my tune,
Yeah.
please listen, tell me what you think of it, hopefully buy it. Or you're just, on tour
Yeah.
presenting your music. You're a journalist, you're a writer. You've also, both you and I have been around a bend a few times, and we've seen the transition that's happened
Yeah.
in the context of this point. You used to have record stores. That was the only place you could really buy music. Right now, we're talking about Bandcamp. We're talking
Yeah.
about streaming. We're talking about this opportunity where discovery is available to anybody who wants it, which is a great thing, but it's also crazy
Yeah.
because you have everything, so you don't know what, how does stuff bubble up? So your role is even more important than ever because you're telling people what they should be listening to, what they should actually be checking out, because they go into a record store, which is gigantic,
Yeah.
and always adding new stuff every day, every
I know,
hour. There's something new.
It's frightening. But I
So
mean, I
your
guess there's
inventory.
our role as, rating radio show. I do a radio show as well, occasionally, monthly or something. I think it's people discover through algorithms and through friends and whatever. I think the role of the music journalist is much less than it was, for sure.
This is true. But the algorithm. So I want to push back on that a little bit. Yes, the algorithm is super strong, but there's also, everything's kind of flipped right now because we used to rely on magazines.
Yeah.
And this is where you would get your things, and those things don't exist anymore. It's kind of like
I do write for Songlines, by the way, but
okay.
yeah,
I love
think it was
Songlines.
interesting in the 80s. You would save up your £20 or whatever it was to, the only place in London was Stearns Records where you got your African records, and you'd click through, and you probably hadn't even heard this stuff, just the cover or somebody had mentioned it, or the guy in the shop would say, "You're gonna like this one," because they knew you.
Yeah.
And then you went, and of course you played it as this object, this fetish object, because you spend a lot of money on it. So you're gonna hear it both sides, maybe 6 times, and you get a different experience than hearing something for 40 seconds. And I don't like that, So it's that's a big difference.
Yeah. You don't spend time with it, and you don't really, you don't discover it like the way we used to get one record and listen to it over and over and over and over again. So it becomes part of our ecosystem, our internal ecosystem. It's like, okay, I need to have this collection of music because we're getting so much stuff all the time. But at the same time, there's an interesting opportunity because more artists from parts of the world that would not have an opportunity to be presented. They would have to go through certain gatekeepers. They would have to go.
Yeah.
They would have to record in cities that had big studios, and then after all that's done, after they release the record, then maybe somebody, a buyer at a shop, would then pick it up and put it into a shelf.
Yeah.
And the ones that became relatively successful were few and far between. There was a lot of money spent. Speaking of gambling, there was a lot of money spent to see if maybe somebody can go in and pick that up. And nothing's really changed. The algorithm's giving you stuff, but you're still going yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And the algorithm is giving you new stuff over and over and over again. So it's really hard for you to get connected to that artist, to connect to that band.
At least in a way, there's a more level playing field in a way.
But now, African music is bigger than ever.
Yeah,
Way bigger
exactly.
than
And I think that's partly due to escaping the gatekeepers.
Yeah.
But also,
there is. But
there's people, there is. Afrobeats is one of the biggest things in London.
Yeah, I think it's also because of the diaspora.
Yeah.
I think it's like it originated. I don't know the history of Afrobeats, but I know that it's much easier to make music right now. You just need you can easily make it on a phone.
Yeah.
And it's easy to share music, share beats, and everything else like that. So there's this relationship, which is exciting to me, where it is happening in different places at the same time. and its Afrobeats is as London as it is
Lagos.
as it is in
Yeah.
Lagos or Accra. But it does beg that question where, and you know this, Africa is gigantic,
Yeah.
and Africa is just not Nigeria or Ghana or even Cameroon. There's so many.
Well, this is why I'm fascinated. I've just been in Brazil, and you've got all these different, the whole para scene. Para's the size of France. Amazing scene, guitar, music, all kinds of music. Sierra's different, Bahia,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
all these states are like countries. So people say, "Oh, I like Brazilian music." So, well, it's like that's. So I think people hopefully are becoming aware of this. I think it's one of our roles is to say,
that's it. That's the point. It's like, I think it transcends the algorithm. I think it's like making a connection with your audience and having them trust you, like that shop owner at Stearns,
yeah,
or the clerk who's like, you should like this because I know you and you should like this. And we have a few record stores that are still doing that here. But I think that making that connection with your audience and getting them to try to understand that Brazil is a collection of very different regions that have their own. They have the same language, but they have a very different perspective. In the States, it would be the difference between New Orleans and Boston. Same thing,
yeah,
same country, but very different cultures, very different influences and backgrounds. And it's that complexity, I think, which became intoxicating for us, getting into this music, getting into music in general, where it's just, we all start with rock or whatever, and then suddenly you discover all of these expressions and you find yourself in that. What is the thing that still keeps you moving, keeps you interested, keeps you curious in this space where a lot of people, especially, once they hit even 35, they stop exploring. They just kind of, I'm just going to keep listening to the Blur over and over again. And there's a comfort to that. I get it. I get comfort, but they don't go before that, and they don't go after that. They're kind of stuck. This one thing like our Huli is awesome. Go explore the label. It's amazing. What Chris was able to do. I respect everybody, but I respect the music lover that goes in the past as well as the music lover that tries to stay current.
yeah.
But so many just get stuck.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, I think it's a lot of things. I guess there's something about if you're an artist, you don't really have a choice. It's like you have to do this, otherwise you get sick or something. It's like something you really have to do, and you can't really rationalize it even. Obviously, I get a lot of pleasure from discovering new sorts of music and listening to old music. It's like a great thing, as whoever it was said. All art aspires to the condition of music. Music can express stuff that nothing else can.
Yeah.
And it's probably something psychological as well. I mean, I think if I don't keep moving or be creative, I get depressed, and I don't want to be depressed. So it's like sort of self protection. But I think I think the thing is, I do sort of feel like if you have a compulsion to do things, and then if you can find a way of doing it, then you have to do it. I don't think there's, that's as far as I've got, really.
No, it's enough. It's like I want to continue having these conversations. It's just like, what is it about this that made you?
Well, also, I
story.
think I said I had these tunes from an early age. I had tunes in my head, and then it's got, I still had tunes in my head, and I thought, well, when I hit the advanced age of 60, it is like you say, it's like, well, am I going to put this stuff down or try and put what's in my head out there in some form, or not? And if I'm not going to do it, when am I going to do it? Because let's face it,
no,
it's like gather ye rosebuds, and it's late in the rosebud season. If you don't.
Yeah, no, and it's like we're inshallah we're healthy, as healthy as we can be. But you do don't wait, do it.
Well,
I have the same struggle.
Really, I don't want to be like,
Yeah.
with
You don't want to be
Ray
sitting there
Ellis on
going,
on my sick bed thinking, damn, I wish I'd done that. You know,
yeah, you don't want to be regrets.
that's
Yeah.
pain. I'm sure
But
that's
sometimes
pretty
it's
painful.
interesting because sometimes those things come from outside pressures,
Yeah.
you know, because that's your own internal pressure. But you had this with an outside pressure. It's like somehow the universe went like, okay, you get this car from Malcolm McLaren and it's not worth keeping because you're living in England and it's like petrol is extremely expensive and all the other things. And then Leicester, wins. And so you've got this boon. I mean, what are you going to do with it? You know, you're just going to sit at the beach and just, smoke and drink margaritas all day, which is fine. But it's like the universe goes like, kind of like whacks you in the back of the head. Like, here it is, idiot. Do it
But
now.
also, Matt, I think I felt Malcolm would haunt me if I didn't spend the money on something creative. Come,
Marley, Malcolm Marley.
Yeah.
From Dickens. That'd be funny. Okay. Yeah, that's true. That's a beautiful thing. I did this to appease the ghost of Malcolm McLaren.
Basic.
That's a good line. Okay. Thank you, Peter. The record is out on your own label, Iskar, right?
It's distributed by the Pusher in Paris, and I'm also doing digital through Stone Tree, which is Ivan Duran's setup. And I met him in Belize with Andy Palazzo, and that's a whole different story, as I'm sure you're aware of it.
God, Andy, the Garifuna.
That's the Garifuna. We still need to sort of push the Garifuna whole story, and that's another story. But yeah, I saw he had a homecoming gig, and I'd written this thing saying, this guy Andy Palazzo, what a great album.
Yeah.
And then he had a homecoming thing, great celebration. Then he did a small friendly thing for 200 people the night after. 3 days later, he was dead. So it was like horrible.
Yeah.
Tragic.
Yeah, I know. I had the Garifuna Collective on a little while ago because we have a decent Garifuna population here.
In the Seattle area, great band, as well as in Boston. Not the Garifuna Collective.
Yeah.
I mean, I hope to do it. I pitched to. Are we off now, by the way?
No, we're not off. We're still talking. Okay. We're still talking.
No, but
but let's close this. Let's close this because I got to get off in 3 minutes and do another session. My editor's going to be hating me right now. Let's go, Peter. Thank you for the time. Music for the Temple of Light is the new record on your label, Iskar. I want to thank you for the time. I want to thank you for your wisdom and your the inspiration that came from football, Malcolm McLaren, that allowed you to create this beautiful record.
Don't forget God.
Inshallah. Thank you. Thank you so much. Be well. Be safe. Thanks for watching Sama, Seattle Circuit Music and Art. If you like what you're seeing, please subscribe, like, and share so we can tell and continue to tell more of these beautiful stories from artists and journalists all over the world and musicians. Be well. Be safe. Peace.